So thanks a lot. So basically, I'm one of the founders and the CTO of Unbabel. And basically, Unbabel is trying to solve the problem that people speak different languages. And I have to say, like, a lot of the stuff that we do actually got inspired by Philippe's work on Kazmakat. And why is this important? Just as a motivation part. So if you look at the internet, like 80% of the internet was in English around 1997. That's not the case anymore. So you have the English internet, the Chinese internet, the Russian internet, the Portuguese internet. And most people prefer to consume content on their language. So this actually presents a problem for most businesses that they do have to speak their customer language. And just to give you like a small example, like in Europe we have all the laws that allow you to do trade between countries, but most countries don't trade with their neighboring countries, mostly because of a language issue. Like on the UK, it's like 3.5% of the GDP itself is lost because of language. And so this is obviously like a big problem that needs to be solved. And why hasn't it been solved? So right now, machine translation, I think most of you will agree with me, it's not there. Like the quality is not there, but it's fast and cheap. On the other hand, the professional translation, like the traditional translation market, where you go there, you deliver a project, and they give it back to you in a couple of days, does not work. It's too slow for the content types that we're producing, and it's too expensive. So if you have to pay like 15 cents per word, the return on investment to translate like user descriptions, customer success emails, doesn't justify it. So this is kind of like why we start thinking, how can we solve this problem? And the other fact is like we're producing so much content online that if you take all the translation industry together, you're not able to translate 1% of the content that's being generated. So I think there's like two major views about how this issue is going to be solved. So one view is like we're just going to work on machine translation. The quality is going to keep improving, and then there's going to be a moment in time where the quality is going to be there. And this time can be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, depending on what you actually believe. And just to give you an idea, I'm going to talk about MQM a lot. So MQM stands for multidimensional quality metric. And the way it works, you have a bunch of linguists annotating like all the errors that they can find in the job, following a typology. And then each error is marked as like minor, major, or critical. And then you have a weighted sum of those errors, and you get the MQM score, where between 90 and 100 is kind of like professional translation, meaning it only has some sort of like minor errors. Everything below has problems. So this is one view, and this is like what Google is doing. They have a general purpose engine. Another view is to say the opposite. So we always want to deliver quality. Then our goal with time is to actually reduce the human effort that is taken to produce that same human quality. And this is basically the approach that we've been doing at Unbabel. So another interesting slide I like to show is basically this blog post from Google last year, which has a tremendous impact on the industry. So Google published something saying that machine translation was solved. And they did this comparison where they compared the former phrase-based system with neural MT and with human. And this, by the way, was made by the marketing department. This was not made by the people that are actually working on research. And what they did is completely flawed. So basically they had a bunch of reference translations. They took one and said, okay, this is the gold standard. And now I'm going to compare the output of my machine translation against the gold standard and another human to the gold standard. And obviously there's several ways of translating something. So SDL afterwards picked the same way and just like did all possible combinations, and they showed that it was possible to get machine translation to be better than professional translation. But the problem is like this got everyone in the industry asking, is machine translation there? Especially like our customers start coming to us and say, no, machine translation is solved, we just want machine translation. And this became kind of a problem to justify, and obviously after they try, they don't want to use it anymore. So, I mean, this is basically on the specific data set from a customer, you get up to 65% MQM, and you get 92 when you do professional. So there's still a huge gap. And the most important thing is like, is not that you don't get some texts that are there, it's like you do get critical errors and major errors, and that's completely break what the sentence or what the text looks like. So basically, the way I see machine translation is like, doesn't matter how better you get on machine translation, you always get some green dots, which means that the translation is perfect to go to the customer. You get some yellow dots, which is like so and so, but it depends what content type you're tackling, and then you get some red dots because the system failed completely, either because of a search error or a unknown word. And as a customer, you have to decide, do you want to send these red dots to your customers or not, or do you want to fix them? And so basically the pipeline that we set up at Unbabel is the following. So you first receive some text, you then put machine translation there, and then there's a fundamental module which is quality estimation, which is something whose goal is like take a text and take the translation and say, is this a green dot or is this a red dot? If it's a green dot, then we're fine. We can send it to the customer. If it's not, if it's a red dot, then we send to our community of translators and we correct it. We send it back to the evaluation and then we iterate over this loop. And the hope is like, as machine translation and quality estimation progress in terms of technology, you can actually be able to translate an exponential number of content, but you only require like a more linear amount of people to work on that. So that's our view to solve the problem. So basically, and so I'm going to give like a overview talk about all the points that we're using, like machine learning and so on, and feel free to jump at any time if you want to go into detail on some problem or some technology. So the way that we do machine translation is basically we have like domain adapted models for every single customer. So we have a generic model. We use translation memories in case that everything was translated exactly the same on the same domain by the same customer. And then we just send the text to the customer empty. What that means is like we have a general model, and then every time you get some small amount of data, you can like bootstrap and train the model to that customer, and the performance becomes much better. And then after that, we still have a customer automatic post-editing, which basically tries to learn what the editors are actually doing. This used to work much better when it was like phrase-based MT, but it's still a useful component. I mean, like almost everyone else, we changed from phrase-based to neural-based MT. The performance is much better, but it does raise some challenges that I'm going to keep mentioning during the talk, which is phrase-based MT, like the adequacy was very good. So basically the biggest problem when you're doing post-editing is like make the text fluent. Now with neural MT, it's the opposite problem. Like everything is fluent, despite the fact that sometimes it doesn't say what it's supposed to say in the source. And in terms of like an editor perspective, now they actually have to read more of the source than they used to do before. And it kind of like, it is better, that's why we changed, but it broke some parts of the pipeline that were different. So just to give you an idea, this is like, I think this is Pinterest, where you have a lot of data from Pinterest. And this is the difference that we got from like a phrase-based system, neural system, and the neural system adapting to the data of the customer. And you get much closer to what you need to get. You still need humans in most cases, again, because we don't want to deliver red dots. But what in practice it means is like the work that they have to do is much smaller. So the cost per word that we have to translate a document just went really down. It became like really cost effective. And the speed that you can deliver increased a lot. So basically, like, just to give you an idea, what are the biggest challenges that we have on MT right now? One is like document level MT. So if you want to deliver like completely a document to the customer, it has to be consistent. And as far as I know, that hasn't been solved yet. There's also some issues with basically how do you use client information like style guides, glossaries, and you put it on the MT so it basically, you pick the right inflection of the word. And then there's some problems that are specific for content types that I'll mention a little bit afterwards. So this is the part of machine translation. Then there's the part of quality estimation. And I think this is something that people have been working for around 4 or 5 years. And basically there's like word level quality estimation that you try to predict if each word is well translated, and sentence level that you try to predict either the effort to correct the sentence based on TER or time, or just if the sentence is good or not. This is an example of the system. So basically for each source word, you go there and you tag the word if it's like well translated or not well translated. So when this task was done, basically we were all using phrase-based MT. So one of the problems that this task is no longer as good as it was, because guess what? Neural MT drops a lot of words, and there's no way to represent here if a word from the source is dropped. So actually on the, if you're following like the competition of quality estimation on WMT, actually the task is going to change this year to accommodate for that challenge. In the training data, is basically people get the source, they get the output of the machine translation, they get the final output, and then they train a system to predict is this a good or a bad translation. And just to give you an idea, so this was the state of the art like 2 years ago, and then we started working on this, and we started with like a linear system where you basically had a bunch more features, or dependency parsing, morphology, try to see if like there was agreement between the words, and we get some good improvements. Then we did some neural system that actually got it slightly better, And if you join both of them, we got the best result on WMT 2 years ago. And then we went to ACL to present the paper, and we're talking with Marcin that won the automatic post-editing task, and we realized that we're basically doing the same. If you're doing automatic post-editing, if you actually have to correct something, it means that is wrong. And so no wonder if you just combine everything together, you get the best system. The other question is like, how good is this system in practice? It's useful, but there's still a lot of improvements. And at the sentence level, the same principle applies. So it turns out that if you're doing automatic post-editing, then basically using that for QE with some extra model or combining gives the best results. So now, from a company, yes?
Sorry, I don't actually have a good feel for what it means to have a word level F1 of 65 or something. So when you're doing quality estimation on a word level, what's the kind of feedback that you get?
So basically, what you do is like you tag a text, and for each word on the output, you mark it if it's like correct or not correct, bad or okay, and then you basically measure the precision on the okay tokens, the precision on the bad tokens. There's like a bunch of metrics.
Right, but I'm wondering, like, does the annotator see the source?
The annotators, no. So the current task is done automatically. So basically, you have a machine translation, and you have like the reference, and you basically map the. So we're actually like releasing a data set together with Microsoft and Amazon and Lucia, where we're doing these MQM annotations over a bunch of documents from product descriptions from Amazon, and we're making it public. And the goal is that then you can do a lot of interesting stuff. So instead of okay, bad, you can say okay, minor, major, critical, or you can try to predict the errors, like this is a grammar error. It's much harder. On the other hand, it's document level, so you can actually see how good is a document. You can see how good is the translation for a document. It's also, when it's read, it's going to be like machine translation, annotations, human post-editing annotations. So you can test the human part of the annotations. So hopefully there will be like interesting work coming out from there. And this is basically what I was going to say. So two problems with the current approaches of QE is like you don't have a good document level system or data. So basically we're using the sentence information to decide if we can skip or not, basically on the conjunction. And we're already skipping like 10% of our content, and without hurting the final quality as evaluated per humans. The other interesting part or challenging is like once you get humans in the loop, all these systems break. So you need to do a different way to train the system, because the way that humans correct the text, it kind of breaks the regularity. So these systems don't work. So we have some work on this using the MQM annotations with some success. But I think these two are like interesting research areas that still need to be solved.
So just a question of calibrating, understanding what's going on. If the machine translates 1,000 words, how many of those will an annotator mark, or I'm sorry, will the automatic system mark as being quality errors on the word level?
So for tickets, again, I'm just talking about tickets because if you go to marketing content, it's different. So this is emails from around 100 to 150 words with our customized system for the customer, so the machine translation starts getting pretty good. I think right now we have 12%. And the way that we tune the threshold to say good or bad, because we have a threshold, is we know what's the average MQM score that we get after the humans, and we say, okay, on expectation, you shouldn't lower this score. So it's actually picking the good jobs. So it's still very far away of where we're going to get. And so the other good thing is basically every time some text goes through Unbabel, we're basically generating more data, and then we can retrain the entire system. And we're also getting very interesting data. So basically, besides the initial and the final text, we're getting all these like mouse clicks, key press, timestamps, and you can process this data, and basically you can predict we can see what are the actions that the person is doing to correct the text. So we've been trying, without success yet, to use this for automatic post-editing, where basically you take an easy first approach that you kind of decide, instead of doing left to right, you decide, okay, I want to translate this word first or correct this word first, and then use this intermediate information to train the system. So the results are still not amazing, but I'm very hopeful. And then there's a lot of stuff you can do with this that we haven't done because we're still a startup, we don't have enough people. For instance, if you look at the pauses that you have, this is potentially a good indicator that the editor wasn't sure what he was editing. So that information should go into the quality estimation system. Or you can like see the patterns of editing and use this to define interfaces specific for clusters of editors. So that's very exciting, but still a lot of stuff to do. And basically, like with this, I explain like the automatic part. So basically, after we're done with this, now we go back to we need someone to correct the text. And we're competing with LSPs. And basically, you always compete on cost. Like, are you the cheapest one? Are you the fastest one? And are you with the highest quality? And highest quality is very variable because given that it's humans annotating and humans doing the translation, we assume that you have to keep on the professional level, like 90 above, 95 above. And then you're basically playing with the other two axes. And the 5 pillars that we use to do this is, first, what's the editor pool? So one thing that we've been doing since the Unbabel started is we're not using professional translators. We have some, but we cater to bilinguals. And the reason is like there's a very small pool in the world of professional translators, and all the companies are basically trying to get them. So they become very expensive, very busy, and it's impossible to deal with our time constraints if we're using them. So the goal is, how can you get a bilingual and make him produce professional quality? And right now, we have a very complicated evaluation pipeline, and kind of like out of 5, if he's 3.5 on top, and I'll explain what that means, he can do paid work. And the vision is like you want to decrease the amount of knowledge that a person has to have a role in the pipeline. And there are some exceptions. You can use monolinguals just to do some proofreading or some specific of domain corrections at the end, but that's basically where we are. Then obviously, like, how good is the text when you start? So if you start with a very good machine translation, then you're almost done. Then the other question is like, how do you pick the best person to do the text? And intuitively, I mean, if I have to translate a soccer article, I know all the terminology, or football, and that's going to be easy. If you ask me to translate a recipe, I don't know the name of the vegetables. So what that means is like I'm more error prone, and also I'll have to do research. And research means I'll have to leave the platform where I'm working, go to another tab, look for it, and with all of this I lost time. And time is critical for what we're trying to deploy. Then there's the editing interface. It's like, what is the best interface that you can do to the person to be fast and produce quality? And finally, is there a way that you can be constantly evaluating the quality of the editor so that he produces good results? So right now we have around 50,000 users. We actually have a lot more registered, but we have 50,000, out of which like 25,000 are doing constant work and are paid editors. Some of them are between paid and non-paid. And how do we curate them? So right now our process is the following. There's some tasks that you do when you join Unbabel that basically explain you how to do the system. And those, like the evaluation is automatic. So we take a reference text, we inject some errors, and then you correct them and you basically track if you correct them or not. And then after that you go to a training phase. On the training phase, we're giving content the kind of you're going to be translating. And then you have another pool called the evaluators that's going there and correcting. And the evaluators are normally either professional translators or linguists. And the reason we had to do this is when we started Unbabel, we were very naive. So we basically had everyone in the community was like evaluating everyone else without us really knowing if they're good or not. So you got the Uber effect. So some people were nice, just gave 5 to everyone. Some people were afraid of competition, so they give like 2 to everyone. So if you basically order by rating your community, it was not a very good indicator of quality. So now we had to move into that. And then after the training content is done, you became either a paid editor or not. If you have a rating of 3.5, you keep getting evaluated, and you have a bunch of signals to trigger the evaluation. And then with time, you start becoming an expert. So we know that you're good. We know what kind of domains/customers you're good at translating. And then there's another pool of annotators, much smaller, which are basically like PhD linguistic students or linguistic with information that do this kind of deep annotations. So this is kind of like, and I'm sorry the image is not very good, what a deep annotation looks like. They see the text, and they mark all the errors. They have like a large typology to pick the errors from, and they mark the severity, minor, major, critical. And we use this data for like knowing our quality, give quality reports to customers, improve the system, and get training data. So the other part is additive profiling, and this is an intuition that we have since the beginning. We haven't like advanced a lot here, and basically it's the idea that if you know a domain, you can do much better. There's actually like some papers that even people that are not bilinguals, if they're domain experts, they can do a better job at correcting a machine translation output than actually a professional translator if he's not from the domain. And the way this works is the following. So basically there's a set of work that's out on the Unbabel platform, and the people go there and say, give me a task. And then you have to decide which task do you give to each person. But we also have the service level agreements. So if we're working on this customer service vertical, we kind of give the guarantee that in 20 minutes after you press the button, your customer is going to get a translation. If we're doing chat, we're trying to guarantee 3 to 4 minutes. Then if we're doing like a newsletter, then it can come to like 2 or 3 hours. But all that we do is basically very fast. That's our main disruptive thing. And what this means is basically jobs are organized in 2 queues. If we're late to deliver the job, it goes to the red queue, which means anyone that is paid for that language pair will pick the job. And really, this is like the main factor that we evaluate if our community is healthy or not. If you should never have jobs on the red queue. If you have jobs on the red queue, it's because something is going wrong. And then on the green queue, you have time, so you can do interesting things. Like you can say, okay, in the first 5 minutes, only the best editors can get it. Or you can say, on the first minutes, only the native editors of the target language can get it, or combine these things. And this is very important, especially when you're using phrase-based, because the output was kind of like word salad, and you can clearly see the difference of a native or not. And then, if you actually had like a topic assignment per document, you could use this using some sort of cosine similarity and pick the editors. And we ran an experiment like 2 years ago, and the results were much better. So what we're doing is like doing an LDA on the documents, and then basically the rating for each topic of an editor was the rating that they get for each particular topic. And this worked pretty well. It never went to the pipeline in production yet. It's hopefully going soon. But this is like the other fundamental part. Then the editing interface is like, this is the standard web interface. So you have the source, the target. The things that you see in red is basically errors that you detect that need to be fixed. So you have to go there and acknowledge them, either correct them or ignore them. On the right-hand side, you have some customer instructions. You have dictionary. Again, it's to try to avoid you leaving the platform, so you can just double-click and see the word in context for other examples. And the Smartcheck is like just a list of the errors. And the errors are very interesting. I'm going to explain what they do, but one thing we observed when we were doing like a big hotel review translation project, we actually were very young. We knew that we didn't have the quality, so we hired professional translators to do the work, to try to get us the deal. And so they were there. They were in our office. They had like 200 hotel descriptions to translate. We got them, passed them to machine translation, give it to them. And at the end, we started looking at it, and there was errors, like really basic errors. And I got there to the current guy, say, is this correct? And he's like, oh, no, there's an error here. You just did it, and there's an error. So what we figured out was like, he was doing like job after job, non-stop. So the first like 5 or 10 or 15 jobs, he corrected that error. But that error was appearing in a lot of places, because the machine translation made always the same error. So eventually he normalized the error. So he was not seeing the error when it was there. If you then go to him and say here, he would know it was an error, but he was not detecting it. So basically what this avoids is like, you have to acknowledge that there's something there. You might ignore it because we have false positive, but you have to acknowledge. It's kind of like fighting this normalization of errors thing. And then we're basically trying to push all of this to the mobile. And the reason is because there's a lot more people with a mobile. I think this is going to be the future, and it's much faster. We actually, I don't have any slide here about it, but we actually, the first version that we had was using options. So the work from Philip, where you can click and get a different suggestion. But we didn't make it work because the options that Moses suggested were not that good. So basically people continue to default in doing this mode. But it's something that we still want to go there. And the interesting thing is if you think how long does it take to deliver a job, basically there's all this MT, automatic post editing, blah, 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 which doesn't take any time at all. And then for each human, you have the time that the task takes to get assigned to him, plus the time that it takes to actually correct the text. And then in most cases, you have 2 humans. The second one is correcting the output of the first one, and this is what it takes to deliver. So you have to fit all of this in 20 minutes. And what we notice, once you go to the mobile, the waiting time decreases significantly. And this is because you can be much more aggressive with notifications on the mobile. So you can just send to a group of people, ping them on the mobile, they'll get it out, correct the text, and submit it. In fact, one of our initial visions was that we have Erasmus students going on the subway, correcting some text, making beer money, and everything was going to be beautiful. But we didn't get there yet. All right, so the final piece is this Smartcheck. So think about this the grammar correction on Word on steroids. So the idea here is that you basically have a bunch of spell checkers, syntax parsers, morphology, word aligners, and we ask our linguistic community to create rules the noun and the verb have to agree. And so with all these rules, and they mostly come by the annotations, we know what are our biggest problems, we can highlight on the interface what the error is. This you're basically using the wrong tone, or using the wrong variety. So turns out that you can have Portuguese and Brazilians in the same community that doesn't work out. So this is part of like what this is addressing. The other part that's much more interesting is the customer. Because if you think about it, every customer has his own voice. So you don't want like Nike talking with the voice of Adidas. But on our platform, you don't get the luxury to go to a group of people and say, here's the project for Nike, now work on that, and read their guidelines. No, they're basically there saying, give me a task, Pinterest. Give me a task, Under Armour. Give me a task, X. So you have to find a way that they don't have to read the guidelines on the right. And the way to do this is like a lot of this stuff you can actually build with the Smartcheck, and it will still underline. So a lot of this is taken care by the domain adaptation and so on, but the other part you want to put it on the interface so that you kind of reduce the cognitive time that they have to read. And obviously, like given all the MQM annotations that we have, this can be used to evaluate the F1 measure on all these particular checks, and eventually it can be used to actually train the system to predict these things. And this is when like quality estimation and Smartcheck starting to merge. And so basically, like what I explained is kind of like what we call the language OS. So this combination between people and machines to offer the scalable translation. The other part of the problem that we need to solve is that most people don't care about translation. Basically, if I have a company, I just want to sell and talk with my customers. So the idea is that instead of having the old translation agency where you have to download something, give something to the translation agency, get it back, or I had to set up like a localization department, we're basically saying, okay, we don't need nothing of this. We're just going to integrate with all the tools that we use and make it completely transparent. So you won't be aware there's a language. So let me give you an example. So Zendesk is one of the biggest customer service systems. So you basically, whenever you see like a help box on the website, you write a query, it goes to Zendesk or Salesforce or so on. And what we have is a plugin that you install on Zendesk. You don't leave the window that you always work, and you say, okay, I only speak English. And basically with us in the middle, every time something comes in, it basically gets machine translated to English, because normally it's enough for the agent to know what he needs to reply. He can also update it to human. And then he puts hashtag Unbabel, replies in English, hits the send button, it goes through us, and that's where the 20 minutes SLA show up, and your customer receives the message in like Portuguese, French, Chinese, whatever you want. But from their perspective, they don't have to care about that. And the other good thing is like they don't have to build a team that is like concerned with like difficulty of what they have to reply or areas and language, because then you have peak hours, you have people that go on vacation, so you can just replace everything and put Unbabel there. And this is basically the area that we've been growing a lot. We have a bunch of integrations. And again, our SLA is around 20 minutes. Like there's some shorter languages that will take slightly more, and the MQM quality is around 94. The more challenging thing is chat. So there's been this movement that most of like the customer service is moving to chat. And we thought we could have a try to solve this. And basically, again, you go to airline Facebook page, you click message, you write a message in Chinese, and there's an agent on the other side. And what you want to do is basically replicate that thing, and all he's seeing is like the Chinese on the other side. And basically this works. The biggest challenge here is like now 20 minutes is too much. It doesn't really have to be real time, because normally those things are not real time, but it can take 20 minutes. And this was actually the first case where we start using QE, because this is mostly like sentences, it's much simpler. And what we do is like get the text, QE, send it to the agent, come back. And I mean, we only have 2 customers, so take this with a grain of salt because we're still starting. But we've been able to get the human to reply in like 2 or 3 minutes by being aggressive with the notifications and having the communities prepared. Mostly is MT, so it's around 80% MT, 20% human, and the quality is around 90%. And this is kind of like we actually did a demo this live on the 6 minutes presentation. It was really cool. So this is basically it. So there's a lot of other use cases that we're also doing. And I think like one of the interesting things is like, before I worked on machine translation in academia, I had a corpus that I had to translate. That was it. But now I actually like each one of these things is kind of like a different translation problem. So I told you about what is the email problem. The shared problem is obvious context. And the context is different than the document level one, because it's 2 people communicating in different languages. Then, for instance, if you go to SEO, this is like something that we've been growing a lot. And here what you get is like you get keyword search. So you go to Pinterest, you want to search for a given image, you put 3 keywords. And they want to translate this. Why? Because they want more SEO in French. So what you get is like these 3 words, there's not a sentence. Some of them form compound nouns, some of them don't. And you have to translate them, and you have an image. So if you run it for any of our machine translation systems, it sucks. And even the humans had a really hard time translating them. But once we start showing them the image, then they made a much better job and were much faster and also happy, because editors also get unhappy sometimes. And the question is like, can we train the system to do this automatically? We haven't done it. Subtitles is kind of the same problem. So those things have been timestamps and are not necessarily a sentence. And if we can either remove the timestamps, make sentences, and then have to put them back, or how do you translate that part? Reviews, like user-generated content, the content is like corrupted a lot of the times. So it kind of breaks all the systems that you have. So how do you deal with that? So yeah, we have a lot of problems to address. And that's it. I mean, we're hiring for a lot of positions, like Philip said, like senior, junior. We have internship programs. Also, we're getting postdocs for André Martins as a project. And this is pretty much what I have to show you. Thanks. Yeah.
So the quality estimation part, should I think of that as just some fixed formula, or is it something that's tuned? Is it learned?
Yeah, it's learned. It's like the first system was a CRF. The other one is just like a deep learning, color decolor.
Okay, so is it possible you could even do sort of quality prediction when you just have the source text? So you could sort of like random prediction in a processing, right? Where you say, oh, it looks like it's going to be hard. I better send it off to a human right away.
So
I guess the machine translation is fast anyway.
Yeah. So I tried to do that. I had a master's student working on that. So it turns out that what you want to predict is the difficulty of translation. And for that, using the machine translation is super useful. Otherwise, you're done with like the difficulty measures for text. And once you have the machine translation, then you might as well use both of them. And then, I mean, it wasn't a very good student, but we didn't actually got very good results. But that's something like, my idea was like, if you can predict this and on the queues, you can route the jobs. Because I mean, I'm mentioning always like 3.5. But in fact, what we're moving towards is, you're good enough to do chat. You're good enough to do emails. You're good enough to do market content that you need to know all of these. Or you're good enough to do chat on this particular domain. So have like a range that we have. Yeah, we tried, it didn't work. It might work, we haven't been able to do it. Yeah.
Do all your users use post-editing, or do they also have the option to translate from scratch?
No, they don't. I wanted to put that as an option, but I got a lot of fight, so I didn't put it. Because there's the question, and I was told this by people in research, that sometimes translation is so bad, it's better to start from scratch. So when I was doing phrase-based, one of the ideas that we have is like, basically when there's a lot of work is because the reordering was broken. So have a first step, if you're not confident, that instead of being from scratch, you just show him like 4 or 5 different starting points, and you could pick one and then go from there. But then we've been too busy just moving everything to neural, and that problem doesn't seem to happen that much.
But the users don't complain about it?
No. No, and we can track when they actually like remove everything. Like you can select everything, delete everything, which becomes a problem because of the markup. So we also have to do with markup. And the way we do it is like we have these small annotations on the text, but we don't show them to editors. Like a lot of the tools you see, they will put text with markup, and it's up to the translator to put the markup in the correct place. We don't want it. We just want that to be automatically, so use word alignments. But we do need to get some positions there that if you erase everything, it becomes harder. But that decreased a lot. It's not a problem. Yep.
So if I were doing this translation for your money, I think the interface that I would want would be a speech interface, where I see several possible translations. Where I'm like, oh, I know what they're trying to say. I speak it. You can do very good speech recognition because you have a lattice of possible translations. And I don't have to monkey around with a little keyboard on my bubble as I'm getting onto the subway.
That's interesting. So we thought about the option stuff because of the keyboard being broken. And also, I don't agree that speech recognition works very well. I mean, we also like doing...
You've got a terrific language model because it's only the translations of the known inputs.
So I thought about doing that to actually get more fluent, check fluency. But I mean, first of all, we never tried. Second of all, we're actually building exactly the same or very similar to speech transcription because we're selling a lot of videos, and videos are transcription plus translation. And we have to outsource this part, which again has all the problems I mentioned, like speed and so on. And it's not that nice. I mean, I have an app here to test that I'll just let you record some speech, talk to it, and then it will automatically call ASR and then MT. And it's a very good marketing app, and you see how broken it is. And then obviously you can press a flag and it goes through Unbabel, and everything comes out perfectly. So I don't think that the accuracy will be enough to produce the quality that we need.
I wasn't talking about for the user who's submitting stuff to be translated. I was talking about for post-editing.
To just basically pick options, or to actually say what the correct translation would be.
To say what the correct translation would be. So
Yes.
I can see on the screen your 4 starting points. And
Oh, I
instead
see.
of editing those with my keyboard,
Okay.
I would like to just read that sentence correcting as I go. It's very easy.
Yeah, then you can
Read the
match.
sentence,
Yeah, yeah.
correct it.
No, we never try that, but that could be interesting. Yep.
So I think a number of people are familiar with your work with posterior regularization.
Uh-huh.
Does that factor in here at all?
I wish. So, to give you the truth, like I've been the CTO for 5 years, which means that I code most of this, and now I just manage people. André Martins is actually leading the research team and doing most of the research. So he's actually using some sort of posterior regularization. So he's very interested in like sparse max and soft max with constraints. And there he actually is getting some results using some sort of posterior regularization on like fertility of the words and stuff like that. But it's not on production, it's still like on the research part. I mean, the gains that you have to do just by optimizing these are still enough that you want to do this first and go to these small details. But he's working on that. Yeah.
I didn't see any. Do you have a feedback into the retraining of the machine translation based on all your
Yeah.
process?
So right now we have like offline. So you get the data, and every week the system retrains. It's basically DevOps. Like we have a machine running. Once you accumulate a given amount of sentences, it fires another machine, retrains, because the retraining we're doing is very simple. It's like you have the generic model, and then you just run a couple of iterations on that data. The more interesting part is like, are you using the feedback online and these? Not yet. Again, if we're doing again these big projects of product descriptions, it makes sense because as you translate one, you want to propagate this to the other one because you're doing it immediately. On this ticket, it's not as necessary, but it's one of the things that is on the roadmap.
So I know that Uber has problems in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Are you guys the Uber of translation?
I mean, we've tried to use a lot of names. We don't use the word translation right now. No, I mean, so far we didn't have. I mean, we always have some professional translators bitching, and sometimes we have like people that are unhappy with the platform because they didn't get work. We haven't had problems. I mean, people have to we pay per hour. We pay between $8 to $30 per hour, and you have to file the taxes on your country. I assume that once we grow enough, that might become an issue, but it's not going to be me solving it. Yeah.
So some of your clients probably have specialized vocabulary.
Yes. So that's one of the problems I was mentioning for MT. So the first approach that we did, that's very basic, is detect the word on the source, put it on the target. No morphology whatsoever. And then basically the community would go there. It will be highlighted. And then, okay, this is a glossary term. You can't change this term, but you can change the determination. Now, the more we move to shipping stuff that's just machine translation, that is a problem that I don't know what's the best way to solve it. Because you need to pick either you have all the conjugations of the form, and then in context you pick the right one, or you need to do some format generation. So this is pretty much a problem that I don't have a solution yet. And also one of the biggest source of problems in quality. So, yep.
I'm working on
Mm-hmm.
and so I wonder what is the most difficult thing in research point of view or from engineering point of view.
I mean, basically, I think quality estimation is still in the beginning. So, I mean, we're using it for some parts where we're very confident, but what it shows is not amazing. It's not something that if I just put 2 pages and show the quality estimation, you'll be super impressed. That's the reason why we haven't still put it on the interface. We've tried with a sentence level, not on the word level. I think being robust. So, for instance, training a quality estimation system on Google plus Final Now remove Google and put Microsoft or put our system, it's broken. Put like a human correction, it's broken. So I think it's like it's an area that's still like beginning. You can still do a lot of stuff with it, and we're getting gains. Like you can see this at the dollars that you save at the end of the month by using it. So it's already good, but there's still a lot of work to do. I think that grammar correction, automatic pose editing, quality estimation, especially if you're doing grammar correction from an MT perspective, they're exactly the same problem. The thing that you don't get from that you used to get with the grammar correction when it was more like rule-based or classifier-based is that if you can't correct but you can identify, then you can tell the user what kind of error it is for him to correct. If you just use like an agnostic system, you just can underline, but there's nothing you can add. So that's why we're still using the Smartcheck, which is more like the later approach. Yeah.
If you have a system, quality estimation system with trust, is it possible to like translate something, get the word level quality estimate, and then retranslate so that you take a different path to the lattice?
I mean, that's something that Andrea's team is starting to work. I think there should be something there. I'm curious to see like how it will work with noise, but it makes all the sense. Like this actor-critic model where quality estimation is a person combining is something that we want to try. We haven't done it before. Yep.
Can you talk a bit about the optimization algorithm for assigning editors under all these different constraints?
I mean, right now it's not a really smart algorithm. Like the topic part is not there yet. But it's basically like you have the time that you need to deliver, and you define a bunch of buckets. And then for each community / client, you can have different granularities. At the end, it's just like community, like Portuguese, English. But then you can have specific for customer or for customer integration. You have the SLAs, and you say, okay, for these guys, I want to start with editors with this rating. And then they are native. And then after a percentage of the time, you just drop the native part, and you keep the other one. So you're basically increasing the pool as you go along. That's pretty much what we're doing, because it's a pull mechanism. You're not giving a task to a particular editor. You're just basically increasing the pool of people that can do the task. And then what you know is like, more or less who's available because of the browser notifications or the mobile, and then you know who you can strike with the notification. Sometimes we send too many notifications so people get frustrated because only one person can get the job, but it is what it is. Yeah. But I'm sure there's like a lot of work to be done here.
So in this talk you talked about some examples where you're doing translation for a company interacting with customers.
Yeah.
Are you guys handling sort of the privacy component of that? Or do you expect the privacy to be handled by the company?
Both. I mean, so first of all, as a company, we need to be GDPR compliant as of May, which means that like all personal PPI information cannot be visible, it cannot leave the EU. So what we have is like we have an anonymization model that sits in the front of all of these. And basically you take the data, you put it on a database either in Europe or the US, and then the rest can go everywhere. We're not doing name entity there because it's not mandatory, but it's something that we want to add, keep improving the anonymization. Now, when I started Unbabel, I thought that's going to be the first thing we're going to get asked. So I actually got a master's student to work on that. Actually, no customer ever asked us for. Only now that we're dealing with like bigger companies, is that we have to go through security, and normally that is not the problem. I think when people see crawl, they're already expecting that doesn't exist, but GDPR kind of changed the way you have to do stuff. So we have an anonymization pipeline in the front, which, by the way, is still an open problem to do it properly. Yep.
So you mentioned really, really fast response times. Do you have a problem? I don't know how many languages you are serving. Do you have a problem with most of your workers being in certain time zones, or you're able to get to a 20-minute response?
So, more or less. First, we don't get so we have 3 levels of language, like production, under development, and starting. But that's mostly about the number of people. And also the amount of volume, because we shouldn't be like creating a big community for Thai if we have one customer, because then all these people are going to be unhappy. The other part, again, something that we thought was going to be a huge problem, it's not as much because, in fact, people tend to be on the country where they speak the language, and people who actually use the system and work on that language tend to be in the same country. So they kind of align the time zones, so there hasn't been a big problem. Thank you.